All right, good afternoon. We're going to go ahead and get started. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Lacey Hensley, and I'm the director of the Institute for Coordinated Community Response. Welcome to our monthly webinar. Couple of tips that we have before we get started, a few housekeeping things. Be sure we encourage you to use the Q&A box to ask questions throughout today's presentation, and I will be helping the presenters today monitor that. So we encourage you to ask questions as they come up throughout today's uh, presentation. And then if you have any technical difficulties, you'll select the host and panelist option, and I will try my best to assist you with that. So a little bit about ICCR before we begin, a little background. We were created in 2018 as a program on the Conference on Crimes Against Women. ICCR is a training and technical assistance program that works with rural communities alongside to help them improve their systemic responses to domestic violence. We recently received OVW funding. We're now a TA provider through the Office of Violence Against Women, working with rural communities on their coordinated community response. And we are currently seeking a pilot site to start our work outside of Texas. So if you're interested in that, my contact information will be at the end of today's presentation, and I encourage you to reach out. Without further ado, a little bit about our presenters today. Ken Shetter is the National Director of the Family Justice Center Alliance at Alliance for Hope International. So he leads all of the directors throughout the U.S. and beyond with regards to family justice centers. And then we're also fortunate to have Kristie Chandler, who's the Chief Executive Officer with the Cardinal Point Family Justice Center in Oklahoma. So thank y'all both for being here today. I'm going to stop sharing and let you share. And thanks again. Take it.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Lacey. And I'm really excited to be here today. It's part of my job is to provide technical assistance both to family justice centers across the country and to communities interested in developing family justice centers. And not only am I working for the Alliance for Hope, but for about half my time, I work for One Safe Place in Fort Worth, Texas, where I am the president and general counsel. And we have been through the process of working with the Alliance. I was once a client in developing our own family justice center here in Fort Worth at One Safe Place. So I am a true believer in the Family Justice Center framework and also in the planning process that I get to help lead across the country. So I'm really excited to be with you here today. And Kristie, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, thank you. Hi, I'm Kristie Chandler. I'm here from Cardinal Point, Canadian County's Family Justice Center here in Oklahoma, and happy to share a little bit about my experiences alongside Ken today.
Excellent. Well, let's kind of jump right in. And Kristie, thanks so much for being here. I knew that if we brought Kristie in, her perspective was going to be really more valuable than mine because she has done the work of developing and running a family justice center in a rural area. And I've gotten to work with Kristie enough to know that she is very good at what she does, and also that she has really waded through some choppy waters to do right by survivors in Canadian County. So I'm excited that Kristie is joining us here today. So a little bit more about the work of the Alliance. I told you about the team I lead with the Family Justice Center Alliance, and our role being to provide technical assistance to family justice centers and multi-agency collaboratives. I'll also highlight the work of our Training Institute on Strangulation Prevention. Gail Strack, our CEO, leads that team. And if you're not familiar with the work of the Institute, I just can't say enough. They really have, I think, transformed the way survivors of near-death strangulation are served in this country. And I would just encourage you to go to our website if you're not familiar and see what training of the Institute that you could take part in just as soon as you possibly can. And then there's our Camp Hope America team that does kind of what we're doing on the FJC side, but they do it around helping to develop Camp Hope programs across the country, mostly that are connected with family justice centers, but we also have Camp Hope programs that are independent of family justice centers. And so that is great work. And we're going to talk more about the importance of Camp Hope America and building services for children a little bit later. Domestic Shelters is the newest program of the Alliance, but it is not a new program. It's just that they recently came under the umbrella of the Alliance. And so the DomesticShelters.org team has built the best, most comprehensive online resource in the country for victims of domestic violence. And if your agency, whether you are a shelter or some other kind of agency that's providing services to victims of domestic violence, if you haven't gone to Domestic Shelters and claimed your profile, you should do that. It's very easy. And they are a great resource to help connect people in your community to you. And they also have a lot of great resources for advocates. So if you're not familiar, I highly recommend you familiarize yourself with the DomesticShelters.org. And then one of our guiding principles on the Family Justice Center movement is that we are survivor-driven and survivor-led. And the way we operationalize that is through our Voices National Network, which is representatives from voices survivors groups across the country. And we meet with them monthly. And I'll just say there is nothing of consequence that we do on the Family Justice Center Alliance team that is not strongly informed and or led by our survivors. So we'll talk more about what it means to be authentically survivor-led as we go. Well, let's begin with just the very basic concept of what a Family Justice Center is. And it is very simply the co-location of the services that a victim of domestic violence, sexual assault, other types of victimization trauma, the resources they and their children need in one place. And it is the collection of agencies that are working together to provide those services. So the magic is not just the co-location. And let's just take a moment to note that that co-location of service is not just a matter of convenience for survivors, but it's a matter of life safety, because we know that part of power and control is the control of mobility of victims. And we also know that victims are in greater danger, or never in more danger than they are when they are attempting to leave a relationship or to get help. So the idea that we could expect a victim to go to 4, 5, 10 or more places to get the help they need, it's not reasonable, and it's certainly not safe. All right, we'll dig into this in greater detail as we go. Part of our work, part of the effort to be survivor driven, is that everywhere we go in the country, we engage focus groups of survivors to talk to us about what their journey has been like to seek services and to get help for them and their children, and what they would like the system to look like. So here are some things that we are hearing from survivors now, having talked to thousands of survivors across the country. They are fearful of systems and don't understand processes. And I will add, often don't feel like they are respected by these systems that are built to serve them. Almost all of them say court is the scariest place to go to seek help. They also often, by the way, say hospitals are confusing and intimidating places to go to get help. They consistently say that shelters are the place they feel the safest. They all talk about having to go from place to place to place, and often being directed to the wrong place, only to be redirected. They talk about the trauma of having to tell their story over and over and over again. And every survivor we've talked to, every single one has said that they want their services in one place. You won't be shocked to know that no survivor has ever said to us, yeah, I just love going to 10 or 20 places to get the help that I need. And Kristie, I know you have engaged survivors in Oklahoma. Do you have anything you'd add just in talking to your survivors?
We see the same thing, and one of the comments is directly from a survivor that she wished the right hand knew what the left hand was doing. So that coordination, not only the proximity of working together, but the coordination and closing the gaps together, very important.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a really good point, because I know that some of the folks that are watching, the question that's already in their head is, how are you sharing information and respecting the confidentiality of survivors and abiding by the law, both federal and state laws, and our funding that requires us to respect confidence and privilege. And so the simple answer is that we are directed by survivors in that work. And so we inform survivors about the benefits and the consequences of sharing information, specifically with the various agencies that are partnering. And then we let them tell us who it is they want their information shared with and under what circumstances they want their information shared. So it is an interesting thing that when you ask survivors if they want you to share their information, the answer is yes, as long as they have control over who it gets shared with and how long. So, Kristie, I think that's a really important point. So, you know, before there were family justice centers, people went all over the place. Here in Fort Worth, when we did a survey at the beginning of our development process, there were more than 30 different places scattered across the county, in Tarrant County, where victims might have to go to get the help that they needed. So the very basic vision is that we bring these services that have historically been spread across the community, often in communities that don't have great public transportation systems, but we bring those services together under one roof. So just I ask you to think as we're talking about this, what might a victim's journey look like in your community? Here is a list of the kinds of services that survivors are going to need to seek. Everything from protective orders to medical help, assistance for their children, civil legal aid and family justice centers. Civil legal aid is the most requested service, and in many places it is the biggest gap in service. And of course, there is very often a need for just basic services and assistance around housing and shelter and food and clothing. And so one of the interesting things that's happening is that the Family Justice Center framework is growing and getting bigger as we evolve and grow in this movement and learn all the things survivors need, and we're building better systems to serve them. The frameworks are getting bigger. And I'll just pause to say one of our more recent initiatives was the poly-victimization initiative, which was under a grant funded by OVC, where we worked on understanding better how to ask survivors about their history of trauma and victimization, and then how to address that, recognizing that no one walks through our door and having domestic violence be the only trauma that they've experienced in their life. And so we know now if we don't address that history of victimization throughout life, then we may be doing a good job of addressing, you know, immediate safety and the trauma they have from this immediate incident, but we're not really doing the work that we need to do to help someone get where they want to be and need to be in their life. And so doing this work around poly-victimization, I think, is really having the effect of, again, expanding the framework of family justice centers. So there is this basic idea that you create a space and you invite others to come in the space and you work together, but it's not just about building a pretty building. Though I think nice spaces are important. So I do want to pause to say that. One of the things that survivors talk about, as I said, is not feeling respected. One of the reasons a lot of survivors don't feel respected is we don't create our best spaces for them. We create spaces that are very institutional, bureaucratic feeling, that often are full of sort of hand-me-down furniture. They're not bright, cheerful, hopeful spaces. And so one of the things we challenge communities to do in developing a vision about building a family justice center is to dream big. Always you're going to have to start small, but to dream big and to decide that you're going to create a space and a place that from the moment a survivor walks in the door, they're going to know that you think they're worth the investment. And so just from the architecture, from the space that you create, you're communicating to survivors that they are respected. But the building is just the start. What happens on the inside matters. And so I want to talk about just having a community-wide response, and to think about not just creating a space or a place where survivors can come to get services, but creating community for survivors, because that's what they're really looking for. So typically, when we talk about starting small, it's 3 partners, a couple of partners, that usually is advocacy, law enforcement, and prosecutors and or civil legal services. I think those are the most basic elements of a family justice center. And then what we see over time is services being added on site, most basic things like counseling, child resources, then multidisciplinary teams around child abuse, sexual assault, moving on to housing services, being more and more culturally competent, being able to serve everyone that walks in the door, no matter what their situation in life is, then thinking more broadly about wellness and well-being and mindfulness, thinking about faith and the role that that plays in people's lives. And today, I think one of the most important things that's happening is the addition of healthcare as part of the services that are provided inside a family justice center, to not only involving kind of what we think of as preventive care, but also thinking about forensic capabilities. And so that's long been a thing in terms of working with victims of sexual assault, but we're also recognizing now that victims of strangulation benefit significantly from specialized forensic exams. So I think one of the most important things that's happening is the development of forensic exam capabilities for victims of strangulation inside family justice centers. And then, of course, thinking about self-sufficiency, thinking about the need for job training and readiness, the ability to have the clothes you need, and to feel self-confident as you're re-entering or entering the workforce. And so I'm going to pause right there and just say, if you may be thinking this looks a lot like a coordinated community response. And no less an expert than Ellen Pence has talked about family justice centers being sort of the ultimate version of a coordinated community response. And I know that Kristie coordinates the CCR in her community. So I just want to ask you, Kristie, to chime in about sort of this relationship between FJCs and CCRs.
You know, it's really interesting because when I first came to Canadian County, our DA's office was the coordinator of our CCR. You know, and it was time to get together and share announcements and updates and that sort of thing. We've had such support from our district attorney's office that when we finally got into our building, they said, we want to hand over the coordination of CCR to you. And we all agreed that we believe FJCs are living, breathing CCRs. And that's how we've tried to model our program. You know, that we're coordinating, we're trying to improve the response, both on the criminal justice lens and the public health lens. So there's a lot of work to do, but just viewing it from that lens, I think has really helped people understand that it's more than, and this has been said to me, it's more than butts and seats. It really is more than how many partners you list on a website. It is about what kind of work are you doing in coordination with one another to improve the response overall.
Yeah, and it's a good point. We said it's more than a building. And just to highlight that, it is true that you can build a building and bring all these agencies into the building, and people can still disappear into their silos, even working out of the same space. So it takes a lot of intentionality around making sure you're not just in the same space, but you're actually working together. Because the truth is, we do better when we're working together and we're not in our silos. I want to talk about centralized intake, but we'll pause. We'll do that in just a little bit. I just think about when I want to do that. But I also want to say that family justice centers are about sharing resources. I know there is a lot of concern about, if you create a family justice center, does that mean there's going to be greater competition for resources. And I think what we've found around the country is you do have to be really intentional around creating some agreements around how you're going to do your fundraising. And I think there does need to be a commitment from the Family Justice Center to not just go compete for the same funds that everybody else is getting, but it's another one of those things that there needs to be a lot of cooperation around. But the other thing is that what we found is, first of all, we're not duplicating resources. So this is not a function of creating, that an agency is going to say, we're going to build a Family Justice Center and we're going to do all the things that a survivor needs in that one place, and we're going to do it all. That would never work. That would be a disaster. The idea is you're going to create this place, and then you're going to invite those who have been doing the work to come in and do it, but do it together. And that'll it's not only more convenient for survivors, but I think it's more convenient for professionals as well. It's a lot when you're working literally side by side, and you can just go right down the hallway and talk to a partner in another discipline as a resource, and you have an existing working relationship with that person, and you share a mission day in and day out. I think it works better, and it's more efficient. And the other thing that happens is as you identify gaps in service, and you're able to work together to say, okay, is anybody already doing this work, and we could do it in a way that more clearly addresses the needs of our survivors? Or maybe there's not a partner that does this today, but who might be the best fit to develop a new area of services or programs to address this gap. That's a way better way to fill gaps in services, and typically the way that looks is that you're working together to go out and seek funding, and I think we're way more successful when we're cooperatively seeking funding instead of doing it competitively. What we're also seeing is that when the government, particularly local government, can really participate in covering the occupancy expenses, the space, but to do it in a way that there is a long-term commitment that a Family Justice Center is going to be able to occupy space, that really it really goes a long way to enhance the sustainability of Family Justice Center. And then, of course, as we've been saying all along, the goal is always, from the perspective of a lead agency, as you are identifying needs for services, that you're finding partner agencies to do that, rather than constantly creating new program areas as a lead agency. Now, that being said, there will be times where you are kind of surveying what's available in the community, and it's just not the right fit for another agency to provide those services. And so there are times when it's appropriate for a lead agency to develop a new area of program, but working with your partner agencies to do that. Let's see. There we go. And so we talked about lead agencies. And at the beginning of the Family Justice Center movement, well, the very first Family Justice Center was created by Casey Gwen as the elected city attorney in San Diego. And that center was run out of his prosecutor's office. And so most of the early Family Justice Centers were led by DA's offices or by governmental entities. Over the years, more and more centers have been developed by nonprofit agencies, so that today about half of the centers in the country are led by nonprofits, and about half of the centers are led by governmental agencies. And sometimes that could be a police department, it could be a sheriff's office, a DA's office. There's some that are led out of mayor's offices, or that are just a department of city or county government. And then we are seeing kind of a new model where there is some level of partnership between governmental entity and nonprofits in terms of leading Family Justice Center. So here is just a kind of a survey of the types of services that partners may provide. Now, one caveat, I just encourage you, don't look at this and feel overwhelmed. and say, what are you thinking? I am in a rural area. So many of these services don't exist. We get that. And so we're going to talk in a little bit here real soon just about scaling and what that looks like. But as we're talking about services, I do now want to highlight centralized intake. And so I personally have a philosophy, and this comes from my experience here in Fort Worth at One Safe Place. I think it is important that the lead agency is taking ownership or responsibility of the centralized intake process. I think it's critically important in a family just center that clients don't walk in the door and say, I'm here to see agency ABC, whatever, and they're just sent to that agency. I do think it's important that for first visits, there is a centralized intake process where it looks pretty much the same for every client. There's consistency and reliability. I think it's important that for victims of intimate partner violence, that there is always a lethality assessment, and that's on the first visit. I know there are some who believe that may not be the most trauma-informed thing to do lethality assessment on the first visit, but our experience has been that when survivors walk through the door of the Family Justice Center, they are ready to talk about these things. And our philosophy is that it might be a really big mistake for someone to walk out the door after their first visit, them not knowing how much danger they're in, and us not knowing how much danger they're in. So we think that danger assessment is really important. We think it's important to communicate to the victim exactly what kind of danger they're in. And then, of course, safety planning needs to be part of that centralized intake. And then at least the beginning of developing a service plan, and then helping to navigate clients through those services is an important part of that centralized intake. Kristie, do you have anything you want to add on that?
For us, we ask minimal questions, but questions that they're going to have to repeat themselves on partner to partner. And we also do not ask any incident-based narrative kind of questions because we feel like there are partners that have higher levels of confidentiality protection in our statutes, and we want them to share that information with that partner agency. And so we also agree with lethality assessment being available at the first visit because we just feel like it's a person's right to know. Much like if you were a candidate for a heart attack and you're going to the doctor's office and you're answering those questions, you deserve to know what your risk is. And we feel the same about homicide risk.
Yeah. And so, and I'll highlight, I said I think it's important that the lead agency takes ultimate responsibility for the intake. That doesn't mean the lead agency has to always do the intake. And there can be all kinds of ways that you share that responsibility, or that another agency takes responsibility. And specifically, if a governmental entity is the lead agency, it might very well make sense that a nonprofit agency actually does the intake because they have stronger confidentiality and privilege protection and are not nearly as open to public information request issues and things like that. We've talked a little bit about how. Yes.
I'm sorry. Before you move on, can you explain the solo practitioner incubator as a potential partner?
Sure. So that's part of the civil legal piece. And I think all of us have a huge challenge of figuring out how to meet the civil legal needs of clients. I am an attorney, and one of my great frustrations in life is that attorneys, unlike the medical profession, who would never tell a victim of domestic violence that comes in with a bad injury, they'd never give them a guide to how they can treat themselves and say, good luck, you can do this, I believe in you. But we do that all the time in the legal world, right? We can't find the right fit in terms of civil legal aid, and the person can't afford an attorney. And so the best we think we can do is to say, well, you're going to have to represent yourself, and here are some resources. I think that's dangerous. And so the solo practitioner incubator is an attempt to find some creative solutions to that. And that was something that was innovated in San Diego, where they had office space that they would provide to new lawyers for free. And they provided some kind of basic office assistance kind of stuff. And in exchange for that free office space, those young lawyers agreed to represent either pro bono or low bono a certain number of clients. So it's an interesting model. I don't know that it's been sustained over a long period of time because it can be kind of expensive. I think another model might be to engage, and I'm working on this, but haven't yet sort of gotten it in place. But I would love for somebody else to do it and then tell me how it's done successfully. But I think our local bar associations would be great partners where we could create a core or cadre of attorneys that would be willing to take one case at a time, either pro bono or low bono. I think, within our communities, we have enough attorneys that we could meet the need for civil legal assistance if we could do that. So yeah, but I love the solo practitioner incubator model. So our services on the Family Justice Center framework is evolving. What started out mostly as kind of citywide or part of a citywide service area. I think more and more, and maybe most of our Family Justice Centers now are serving countywide areas and creating countywide resources. We are seeing the availability of economic and financial assistance and assessments and training and credit repair services being available. And that's, with financial abuse being such a prominent part of the cycle of power and control, that's really important. A lot of people come into Family Justice Centers with the desire to seek spiritual care and for spiritual connections. It's not something that should be pushed on a client for sure, but for it to be available and for clients to know that that's available can be really important. Job training, personal coaching, even job placement, and housing services are getting more and more comprehensive through the work of Family Justice Centers, and including now emergency housing. We have more and more centers that are being led by community DV agencies or where shelters are being co-located on site with Family Justice Centers. And then we're seeing lots of campus approaches where you've got maybe multiple buildings on one piece of property that make up a Family Justice Center. For example, you might have the CAC and the Family Justice Center located right next to each other and establishing a more extensive level of partnership. High-risk teams are innately a part of the work of Family Justice Centers now, and because Family Justice Centers are multidisciplinary teams that include law enforcement, that include prosecution, I know there are those that think if we build a Family Justice Center, that is a high-risk team, and we can check that off. That's not really what we're talking about. You really need to create a model that has a whole separate process where a multidisciplinary team or task force of people is getting together to staff and manage your highest risk cases, which means that you need to get the permission of those clients for their case to be part of a high risk case review. And related to this, in a way, I also think that Family Justice Centers need to be an integral part of the fatality review teams. And it's not only important that you have a voice in cases that might involve the death of a client of the Family Justice Center, but that you're part of the conversation of reviewing homicides where victims did not seek services at the Family Justice Center. I think that's a critically important part. And we're doing a lot of work at the Alliance now around what we're calling hidden homicides, which is cases that are staged to look like suicide and that too often are actually getting ruled or determined to be suicides. And so I think one of the things that may be important is that we start reviewing suicides of women of a certain age in our communities and looking for cases where there is a history of domestic violence. And one of two things is going to happen. One is we're going to discover that there's a possibility that there are cases where perpetrators of murder are getting away with it. But we're also going to begin to understand the full impact the full impact of fatality as it relates to domestic violence, because we should be seeing suicides of women where there's a history of domestic violence as being DV-related deaths. And they're doing a great job of that in the UK, by the way, but it's something that we are not really doing a great job of in the United States. But I think family justice centers are uniquely qualified to lean into that work. And of course, this touches, but does not fully encapsulate the whole issue of missing and murdered Indigenous women across the country, which I think we can play an important role in addressing as well. Another area of focus of family justice centers is Hope Science. I don't think it's too much to say that the work of the Family Justice Center movement is now founded in or grounded in Hope Science. And Hope Science, by the way, hopefulness is. It is more than a wish. Hope is the belief that your future is going to be better than your past and that you have agency or control over that. And it turns out that it turns out that hopefulness is the greatest indicator of well-being and the ability to overcome trauma. Hopefulness is actually what creates resilience. So this is true for kids who've experienced trauma. It's also true for adults who have experienced trauma. So the most important thing and by the way, this has been confirmed by more than 2,000 published studies. So the most important thing we can do for the long-term well-being of our clients, both adults and children, is to increase hopefulness. Good thing is we can measure hope. So we can know a person's level of hopefulness when they come in the door, when they leave, and months after receiving services. Now, that being said, it does not mean that we can ignore those most basic needs like food, shelter, clothing, transportation, safety, security. You do have to continue to meet those needs because, I mean, you see this is essentially Maslow's hierarchy of needs. We think hope is essentially the same thing as self-actualization, and that the hierarchy works just the same. So that if we're not taking care of those needs at the bottom level of the triangle, then we're not going to be able to get to the top. But ultimately, our work is about creating hopefulness because that's what absolutely what leads to resilience. Another big focus of the, yes?
So sorry, you have a couple of questions.
Okay.
Are you good? Okay.
Yeah.
So one is, do you have an opinion on including in fatality review cases in which someone who may have had a history of victimization involving strangulation or traumatic brain injury, even if their actual death was not deemed a homicide?
Yeah, I think it's always of value if there is that history of domestic violence, and especially if it involves those extreme, the indicators of extreme risk, I think there's absolutely no harm in including those cases as part of a fatality review, because the determination that that was not a homicide or not a DV homicide was not a multidisciplinary decision in most cases, right? Except to the extent that it might include law enforcement and the medical examiner, but it didn't necessarily involve these other disciplines that are also experts in the field. Kristie, you have anything else on that? I think it's a good question.
I agree. I just think that there's such opportunity still to address gaps, to address concerns that exist for people that have had those experiences who have died, and some recommendations specifically in those cases.
Yeah, I'm going to use it as another opportunity to say, look at the suicides. We got a great opportunity. We had a police officer here in Fort Worth that's working on his PhD and happened to call us and said, "Do you have any good ideas for my research work?" And we said yes, because we've been thinking about how do we conduct this research. And so we suggested go to the ME's office, let's get a list of the suicides of women of a particular age, and then we can do open records requests to figure out how many of them involve a history of domestic violence and kind of go from there. So yeah, I absolutely believe in broadening our perspective around fatality review.
Great.
And
One more question. Do you find that the victims who most need the services of an FJC are the ones least able to access them? For example, they live too far away, they can't take time off work when the FJC is open, the abuser's a stalker and tracks her movements so that she can't get there, etc.
I don't know that I would say it in that way, that the ones that most need the help are at least able to get there. I mean, I think across the country, it's pretty consistent that about 60% of the victims of domestic violence that are seeking services in FJCs are scoring in the extreme or high level on the danger assessment. So we do have a sense that the people that are walking the door need to be there, and that people that really need to be there are getting there. However, it is true that there are barriers for a lot of people. So it is incumbent upon us to figure out how to help people get over those barriers, right? So we're kind of, I think one of the primary philosophies of Family Justice Center is that you meet survivors, victims where they are, you serve them according to their how, when, where they want to be served. And I'll give you a good example. Early on, one of the victims that sought services with us, the perpetrator, her abuser, was a Fort Worth sergeant in the police department. She didn't want anywhere near a facility that housed cops for good reason. So we met her off-site, and we did that for months. And we ended up developing the kind of trust that she ultimately was 100% confident in coming in, and knew that the cops were in a different part of the building. She gets to decide who knows that she's there. And so she was confident in that, and there was never an issue. And in fact, then her kids started coming to camp, and we're, more than 10 years into providing services to that family, and they are still getting services from us. So, but for, a good couple of months at least, we went and met her at a place where she felt safe and where she wanted to be. We have, we have arranged transportation. I mean, there are all kinds of things. And I think it's just incumbent upon us to figure out what we need to do to make sure a person is served in the manner that they feel comfortable, safe, and that works for them. It's a good question. Anything else before we move on?
No, don't see anything else right now.
Okay, so another area of focus now in the family justice center world is in serving children, because if we aren't serving kids, then we are doing nothing to intervene in the generational cycle of violence. We may be doing a great job in creating safety in the moment and for the adult victim, but we're not doing anything to break that cycle. And so it's going, we know very likely to repeat itself in the next generation. And so just a couple of things I would note. First of all, we should start seeing the population of kids that are exposed to domestic violence the way we see kids who are physically abused, because the truth is kids that are exposed to domestic violence are suffering the same long-term harm as kids that are physically abused. We also know that there is a tremendous amount of co-occurrence of domestic violence and child abuse. In fact, a significant percentage of kids who are abused, that abuse is happening as they get sort of tangled up in or intervening in domestic violence that involves their parents. It also true is that it's also true that kids that are who are exposed to domestic violence are 1,500% more likely to ultimately be physically abused or neglected. They're 6 times more likely to commit suicide. They are at least 50% more likely to abuse drugs or alcohol, and they are many, many, many times more likely to commit domestic and or community violence as adults. And of course, if they're girls, they are many, many, many times more likely to be a victim of domestic violence as an adult than if they are not exposed to domestic violence in childhood. Also, I know there is a long-held belief in the domestic violence world that if we take care of mom, the kids are going to be okay. That's really never been true, and it's certainly not true today, though I think there are actually agencies and individuals out there doing this work that are still operating under that philosophy. Here's what I have found, both in the process of talking to survivors around the country and asking them specifically about what we're doing for their kids, and in working in Fort Worth to develop systems to serve kids. Here's the truth. If we aren't taking care of kids, we're actually not taking care of mom, because it turns out that mom's concern about her kids and the well-being of her kids is very high on her list of priorities and concerns. So if an adult victim of domestic violence comes in for services and they have minor kids, and we never do anything to understand what's happening in terms of the kids' exposure to that violence, and we never do anything to work to assess the needs of the kids, and we never do anything to get them the help they need, then not only are we not serving the needs of the kids, we're not serving the needs of mom either. So I think we have to see it that way. And so then the question is, all right, if we're going to build a comprehensive service for kids, and these are some of the statistics I just talked about. But if we're going to build some of those services, what does that look like? Well, for us, I've come to believe that Camp Hope America programs are the absolute best foundation. It's a great program. It's a week of adventure-based overnight summer camp that includes a curriculum designed to create hopefulness in kids, and then year-round mentoring, life skills, strength-based programming to what we call pathways to hope. And so what we're finding is that kids that participate in Camp Hope are not only experiencing an increase in hopefulness through the week of camp, but that increase in hopefulness is sustained over time, thanks very much to the ongoing work of the Pathways program. However, Camp Hope can't be it. That can't be all you do for kids. You have to be very intentional about thinking about systems from beginning to end of your processes. So I think the centralized intake of your adult should also include an assessment of the needs of the kids that includes understanding what the kids have experienced. I think it necessitates having advocates, and not everybody can do this. I understand there's a capacity issue here, but I think over time there should be a priority on having advocates on your team whose primary or only job responsibility involves serving the needs of the children and working toward the safety and well-being of the kids. I think it's important to have on-site counseling for children and youth, which is something we've struggled with a lot. But it's something we're absolutely committed to, that just like we don't want to have to refer adults to another location to get the basic services they need, we want to make sure that the kids can get the basic services they need in our building as well. And then I think another critical component is that every advocate should be trained on how exposure to domestic violence impacts children and youth, and should be trained on how to talk to an adult victim about what their kids are experiencing. And I can tell you, I just had this conversation with our Voices National Network, and actually they brought it up when we were having a meeting with them about what kinds of training we needed to be providing to those who serve victims of domestic violence around the country. And they brought up the fact that advocates need to be they need to understand what their kids are going through, and they need to be able to talk to them about what their kids are going through, and they need to be able to connect their kids to resources. So I think this children's piece is critically important today. So here's a little bit about the Family Justice Center movement today writ large. We've just got through counting, and we have been able to identify 100 family justice centers that are operating around the country in 44 states. And I will tell you there are 2 additional states where family justice centers are in really elevated stages of development. As you saw before, I think half of our centers are led or coordinated by community-based DV or sexual assault. Half are coordinated by DA's offices or police departments or other public agencies. We have something like 50 communities that are in some stage of planning around the country. We are beginning to see an effort to create statewide initiatives. The most vibrant is in California. We see many states where there are state statutes that define what a family justice center is. In California, they actually have a significant amount of funding that is dedicated to family justice centers. We now have centers in 25 countries. We have centers that are rural, urban, suburban, tribal, and we now have FJCs that are FJCs are identified in VAWA. There is funding that's not restricted solely to family justice centers, but family justice centers are identified as specifically eligible for various funding opportunities, particularly through the ICCR program. And as I said, we were seeing model state level legislation in a number of places, and then in a number of other places where there are efforts to get that legislation in place. And then the largest international FJC is in Mexico. And we now have 2 centers, by the way, in Canada, which we're excited about. And at least one of them is definitely a rural center. All right, so let's talk specifically now about rural centers. And we have a lot of rural centers around the country. The information I'm providing on this screen is from an annual survey that we do of our directors. And so this is information provided by directors who self-identified their centers as being rural. So they all indicated that they operated with a budget, an annual budget of under $500,000. So this is doable. Almost all of them are supported by a volunteer program. And I will say, even every center, virtually every center, I think would tell you they couldn't do what they do without the help either of volunteers or interns. For us in Fort Worth, our interns play a critically important role in both our intake process and our screening process, and also in a lot of the research that we're doing and evaluation that we're doing year to year. Our rural centers are serving on average about 500 clients a year. And so you've seen all these slides where I've just shown you dozens and dozens of potential partner agencies. That doesn't mean you have to have all those agencies on site to do good work. You want as many as you can get, but on average, our rural centers have 4 on-site partner agencies and 9 to 11 off-site partner agencies. Now, people may be identifying partner on-site and off-site a little bit differently. I think for some, off-site is partners where you're regularly referring people to another location. I think some consider an off-site partner to be one that is periodically coming to your center to provide services. So, so there's a little bit of variance to what that means definitionally. The most common services provided in rural centers are advocacy, safety planning, counseling, access to food, sexual assault, and sexual assault programming. So you notice there 2 glaring gaps, and that is housing and civil legal services. That doesn't mean those needs aren't addressed. And at some rural family justice centers, those needs are certain, or those services are certainly being provided on site. But I do know from talking to folks around the country that our rural centers probably have a bigger challenge than anyone in really addressing the civil, legal, and the housing needs. And then in terms of the greatest need for training, our rural directors are identifying gun retrieval and working in different difficult political climates. And I would say those 2 things are likely related, though they're not completely the same thing. We're beginning to talk about this a lot. I'm in Texas, Kristie's in Oklahoma. We literally put our funding at risk to serve immigrants and to do it openly and to invite them in. when we are welcoming, accepting, and affirming to LGBTQ kids through our children's services. We are putting our funding at risk, but we've made the decision that it's not okay to serve the most marginalized populations, but to do it quietly, because those are the very populations that need to hear us say we're here for them. So we're just going to have to wade through these times. And if it means we lose some level of government funding, then we'll have to go find ways to replace that. But it is a real challenge, just in practical terms, for those of us that are working in red states, I think, is the reality. Kristie, you're in Oklahoma, so you experience a lot of the same things we are in Texas. Any thoughts there?
We do, and there's definitely a strong need for innovation and creativity when it comes to thinking about diversifying how you get funds or just how to meet the needs, because sometimes it doesn't equate to money every time, but finding friends, very important.
Yeah, absolutely. So, and I'll just a note on this gun retrieval piece in Texas and what is it, Texas, Oklahoma, and Louisiana, maybe, or Texas, Louisiana, Mississippi, I forget the states, but in the Fifth Circuit, there was a case, Rahimi, that ruled that it violated the Second Amendment to prohibit a civil protective order, a person who had a civil protective order against them from possessing a gun. Obviously, this has potential dire consequences. That case has been argued at the Supreme Court and will likely get a decision in June or July. So what has been affecting us in the Fifth Circuit states potentially could be affecting everybody in the country. So I would just encourage everyone to be watching around June or July for that decision to come down. And so I know that no matter what happens at the Alliance, we'll be providing some TA and probably some webinar resources around what the implications of the Rahimi decision are, no matter what it is. Well, I want to just ask Kristie a few questions here, because she is the resident expert on this developing family justice centers in rural areas. And so also this is a great time for any of you that want to lean on Kristie and her perspective to share questions you have. But first, Kristie, just tell us a little bit about your journey to becoming the CEO at Cardinal Point.
Yeah, my entire career, I'm on my 22nd year of working alongside survivors and allied professionals to address gender-based violence. And so my first job was in a shelter in Oklahoma County, which is the neighboring county to us, but it takes about 30 to 40 minutes to get there. And so spent 15 years there, also did some work. We require 52-week group for people who cause harm in Oklahoma. So did a bit of that and went on to be the FIPSA state administrator, and we certify victim services and batters intervention programs in Oklahoma. And that was my position before I took this position here in Canadian County.
Awesome. Well, you are very well qualified for this work. Well, so tell us about Cardinal Point.
Yeah, I'll just be really vulnerable right now and say I was really afraid to apply for this position. In my victim services work at the YWCA in Oklahoma City, we actually wrote one of the first grants to have a family justice center, didn't get it. And then we had Kim Garrett, who came into Oklahoma County and really put us on the path to making that dream come true for our county. So I was there when the second Family Justice Center of Oklahoma was being developed. So this is the third, and we're the first non-urban family justice center. And so I was really nervous to apply. I didn't think I was the person for the job. And I will say there are some days I still feel really like I'm stinking it up out here. But, we had a strategic plan that the Alliance for Hope provided for us. They came out and did a study tour and did a great job talking to all the systems providers and community organizations and most importantly, survivors. And so after I received the position, I basically got this lengthy strategic plan with a 5-year goal, and then promptly wrote a VOCA grant. At that time, we were under the district attorney's office and trying to be really conscientious and intentional about how we were going to be funded and what our governance structure would look like. We weren't sure we wanted to be a nonprofit. We had another family justice center in Oklahoma that didn't survive the turnover of a district attorney that had started in a DA's office. And so we felt really vulnerable there. So we're actually something called a Title 60 public trust. We're quasi-governmental. So that's been an interesting path for us as well. And then COVID hit after we got the VOCA grant. So I find us to be really resilient and to have kept going and all of that. And we do have a tribal tribal nation headquartered here in Canadian County, and they have a wonderful victim services program and several programs available to not only their tribal citizens, but also to Native persons. And one thing that I noticed when I was a part of the study tour out here in Canadian County was they weren't present. So in my interview, I brought that up, and everybody was really keen to figure out how to get the tribe involved. And they were one of the agencies that signed on as supporters of our first VOCA grant. And so we've really come a long way in that relationship and supporting one another. So the name, Cardinal Point, it's not about the bird. You'll notice there's no red bird there. And I am an Indigenous woman. I come from the county just to the south of us. And what I know to be important is honoring. So honoring your partners, very, very big, but honoring your space, right? And where you are in your community. And so that was really important for me that we do that, and we honored the Cheyenne and Arapaho tribe. So our name really references the 4 directions, which is important to Indigenous communities. So our tagline is a direction for hope. When we say Cardinal Point, we're talking about the 4 directions. So that's kind of just how we got started. We are a staff of 3. It's myself and 2 other staff. We keep that intentionally that way because we lean on our partners to do their very unique services here in Canadian County.
It's fantastic. I love your name and your logo. And one of the things we talk about during the planning process and the visioning process is thinking about honoring the culture of your particular community, and in the name, in the facility, in the architecture, and how you provide the services. So congratulations on that, because I think that is critically important to the long-term success. So I think in our world, the big FJCs in large urban areas tend to get the most attention. And I think people often just associate family justice centers with large urban communities. But in your opinion, having sat in the seat you're sitting in, do you think the model is as relevant or necessary in smaller communities?
I do. I will say it is very hard to not compare to those urban centers and those centers that have so many resources and so many dollars behind them, and think, again, I'm stinking this up right now. But we do find it very valuable to recreate this model that matches the needs of our own community and the lived experiences of survivors in our own community, and doing absolutely everything that we can do with the resources that we have and making it our own. And for the exact same reasons that big communities need coordinated efforts and people working in close proximity to one another, survivors in rural communities deserve that too.
Yeah. I think you're 100% right. So could you give us maybe a few advantages to operating an FJC in a smaller community, and maybe some disadvantages or challenges?
Yeah. What I found, again, I moved to this county from a big urban county, and man, the advantages really have to do with the relationships. A lot of the folks who've been working in these communities grew up in these communities, people know them. And so, really leaning into those relationships with people that have trust and certain reputations in the community, such a great advantage, and getting those folks on your side and helping them to understand the real issue is so important and such an advantage. And I would say the disadvantage that I've seen you know, sometimes when we're out in smaller communities, we like to think that this stuff just doesn't happen out here. And so, you know, we think because we don't have the amount of services, or we don't have the diversity of services, that it's because we don't have the problem, and that's just not true. And I think that's just been one of the disadvantages, is, you know, people ignoring the issue, and it taking a little bit of time to helping them to understand that, yes, this is happening to your neighbors.
Right. That's a good one.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm kind of hearing that around the country from survivors that are from smaller states and more rural communities too. So it's interesting that you said that. Well, one of the things that when I'm talking to folks in rural communities, just about the biggest challenges seem to be about how to create a vision and sort of implement a partner with law enforcement, because in bigger communities like the one I'm in, there are dedicated units that are very large. So it's kind of easy to think about, well, we just locate the DV unit there and start from there. But it's a different kind of conversation. So what advice would you have about building effective partnerships with law enforcement in smaller communities?
Yeah. What I have found that has really worked well for us is finding out what they care about and who they know, and then elevating them for that passion and infusing it into your work. So, for example, we have several law enforcement who are active members on our CCR. And so just getting to know them, one of the officers is really passionate about mental health and very passionate about law enforcement, getting their mental health needs taken care of. And so we kind of leaned into that. And there was a school district that was experiencing some teens um, who were actively trying to cause self-harm. And we did have one person die by suicide in that high school. And some of the conversation we found out was at least one of those was related to the fact that the girlfriend broke up with the boyfriend. And so
Wow.
it led to conversations about how teens have the right to end relationships, right? And so really talking about, and this was all during teen dating violence as well. So we were able to use his passion and capitalize on that mental health aspect. And he ran with this, got us a lunch and learn set up with all of the school district personnel, counselors, and superintendent. And we did a whole collaborative 1-hour lunch and learn about teen dating violence and responding to the mental health needs of teens in our community, because we knew he cared so much about that mental health aspect. So I would say, figure out what people's passions are, lean into them, and infuse them however you can into the work.
Fantastic. I'm going to read a question from one of our participants. Kristie, being in a rural area myself, I know we tend to see a concentration of services in our largest town, not quite a city. Does that hold true for you as well? Or are you able to draw partner agencies to your smaller community without having to locate in the county seat?
So it's interesting because right now, technically, we're in the county seat, but if you cross the road, you're going to be in the city that's the most populated in our county. And actually, you're going to get into more suburban areas in that part of the county. And so, it has been a challenge for sure, because we don't have that many like nonprofit partners within the county to begin with. And so, yes, a lot of the services are in that more populated area. And, so we've had to think about what would some satellite opportunities be in our least populated areas, or, we have 7 rural tracks in Canadian County. We also really like, I do something called mobile navigation, which speaks to what you were talking about, Ken, meeting people wherever they feel safe to meet. And then I've also really been pushing our staff to think about where can we go in the really rural parts of our county that we can just offer something in the community, but also be a presence and be more accessible, whether that's we go to some church once a week or every other week
Mhm.
and offer something to get our information out there. But
Yeah.
we really have to be creative about how to get into the community. And honestly, that's one thing after 22 years of doing the work that I've just really challenged my colleagues, because I just feel like we've sat in buildings, comfy places, and waited for people to come to us when they need us. And they need to see that we're out there meeting
Yeah.
them where they need us to be.
Yeah, that's good stuff. We recently have been in Alaska. In fact, we're going to be back in Alaska in a week and a half. And there are a lot of rural areas in Alaska, and they have the interesting challenge that some of them you literally cannot get to. Some of them you can't get to except in a plane, and some of them you can't. There are times of the year you just cannot get there. And so one of the discussions we're having in Alaska is, does part of that service delivery model have to be providing virtual services to some areas that you just cannot physically get services to? And so while I typically believe if a client prefers to be served virtually, we have to have the capability to do that. But the general rule is we should always strive to serve someone in person, because it works better, right? There are things we're going to see in person that we're not going to see virtually. But have you looked at any of that for serving any of your more rural areas?
Yeah, I think we were one of the first to get a chat option, to get a text option. We're just trying every way to be available and accessible to people. So again, the opportunity for innovation and creation is just unlimited right now. But I think that if there is any way possible to make that in-person connection, that is really valuable. But where else? And so I've even been thinking about where are survivors going? And I know in my county, it is to their faith leaders. So I've been trying so hard to make relationship with those faith leaders, and then getting myself into those women's groups, and, just kind of inviting myself into their space so that people know that we're available. And actually, we were called upon by one pastor because they had an elder abuse concern. And
Right.
so we were meeting that person at the church because that was the safest way to get away from the person who was causing them harm. So, who can you lean on
Right.
to do that?
Well, and you made an interesting point there with kind of chat options, and because a person may be willing to reach out virtually at the beginning when they wouldn't be willing to come in person. And so it might be that that's the ideal way to get to connect with someone, at least for the first time, and then get them comfortable with coming in, right?
Yes.
So I love that discussion. I think it's really smart. And by the way, we just have to say that what we've learned through our DomesticShelters.org partnership is that the first place survivors are going is to the internet to get information. They're Googling. They're not picking up the phone and making a phone call. The first thing, they're going to the internet. And so what that means is, no matter how small your community is, you need to have a really vibrant presence on the internet. You have to have a website that's easy to navigate, that clearly describes what the services you offer are, that helps people connect to you. And you need to understand how to make sure that when someone in your community Googles anything about abuse, domestic abuse, that that you're going to pop up in their Google search, right? And so we definitely don't have the time to get into that, except to say, if you're not thinking about that, you definitely need to be. Lastly, and then we'll move on to a few final pieces of information. What advice do you have for someone that's interested in developing a family justice center in a rural community?
It's funny, because sometimes when we're asked for advice, we give advice very confidently, but how comfortable are we with our own advice? So I'm going to give you this with a caveat. What I have found to be extremely beneficial for helping educate the community, helping to get buy-in, helping people to understand the benefits of a family justice center, especially in a community like ours, is to show up and be present wherever you can. So I've gone to chamber coffees. And I say that because the caveat is I don't even like coffee, so there will be coffees and chats. I don't like chatting very much either. So sometimes you have to get really comfortable in the uncomfortable parts of the work, but being present, showing up, And because this is a way to earn trust. And for me, I feel like that's what I've been busy doing for these first couple of years, is helping people to be at ease with the fact that we're not coming here to duplicate. We're not coming here to take over. We really are here to, position survivors' needs first, and just hear from them about what they need, and work with partners to meet those needs. So I would say that's my biggest piece of advice. And then, the support will come, and surround yourself with supporters. Don't focus on detractors, because there will be those too. And sometimes it's difficult to not focus on that. But I've had so many more supporters than I have had people with concerns. And it's just because of that relationship building.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, you would never know that you're someone that doesn't like to chat, Kristie, but I feel your pain. All right, well, let's quickly go through a few benefits and challenges. And this is true rural, urban, suburban, anywhere. So benefits first. Family justice centers save time for victims of domestic violence. Obviously, if you're not forcing somebody to go from place to place to place, you're saving time. And particularly if you are removing that being misdirected from one place to another, which is, I think, among the most frustrating things in the world. We've talked a lot about how a family justice center leverages resources. It's a good moment to say, I think it's important that partners don't pay rent in a family justice center, so that by being there, they have the opportunity to save money on their bottom line. If you can take occupancy expenses off the books, then you can leverage those resources, put them back into services, so that you can meet the expanded need for services when you become part of the Family Justice Center. The pie gets bigger. It turns out that we're not all competing for the same amount of dollars. Turns out that there are other dollars and more dollars available when we are working as part of a collaboration and a partnership. I think this is a big one. We do better together. It just makes sense. We can think about just how we've operated in our own lives, that when we get out of silos, when we're working as a team, when we're working with others, when we're taking advice, when we're open to advice, and when we're leaning on others at times when we're asked to do something that maybe is not an area of strength for us, we do better together. And then there are a million studies out there about collective impact, and that when you add the work together that we're doing, the sum is greater than the parts. And then finally, and most importantly, family justice centers save lives. And so what we're finding in family justice centers across the country is that victims of domestic violence that walk through the door of a family justice center almost never die. And so everywhere where I have seen this quantified, and where we're seeing the number of homicides among the population of people served in family justice centers, I can absolutely say this, that the homicide rate among the population of people served by family justice centers is lower than the homicide rate of our general population, which is remarkable when you consider that typically 60% of the people that are receiving services in family justice centers are scoring on the highest, most extreme danger levels of evidence-based lethality assessments. And when you consider that somewhere around 60% of the people that are being served in family justice centers are victims of near fatal strangulation. So the fact that we can legitimately say that we have homicide rates among our population of those served by family justice centers, it's lower than the homicide rate of the general population. I think that's a remarkable thing. And the other thing that we're seeing consistently happen is that communities that have vibrant family justice centers experience a significant and sustained drop in the domestic violence homicide rate. So I think the bottom line is that we know what is happening in family justice centers works. And one of the tricks now is not only to kind of replicate that work and to sustain the work, but to figure out how to do a better job of engaging the community, so that the people that have not traditionally been walking through our doors know about us and feel like this is where they need to be. I think that's our biggest challenge.
Hey, Ken, really quick
Yes.
on the pie gets bigger. I also learned that it's really important to put real action behind what we say are the benefits. And so one example, we were only in operation for 2 years at the time, and we got picked to be the beneficiary of a fundraiser. And we didn't know how much that fundraiser was going to be, get us, but we offered to share it with our 2 founding nonprofits, and that was the DV Agency and Legal Aid. And we were able to write a $10,000 check to Legal Aid. And we were going to do the same for the DV Agency, but they turned around and said, "You're so new. We believe in this so much, you
Wow.
keep it." So we actually wrote checks, and we were prepared to do that just to prove that the pie does get bigger.
That's fantastic. Well done.
Yeah.
And that's not an easy check to write, is it? Well, here are some of the challenges. Family Justice Center. Again, this is true of a Family Justice Center in any community. Number one is always egos, turf, power, and control. Right? You're going to have those that feel like you're invading their territory, that don't want to get out of their silo, and it's always a challenge. And it's not that Casey Gwen likes to make this point. It's not that people are afraid of change; they're afraid of loss, right? So it's okay to do something different. It's when they fear that different is going to cause them to lose something. So I think part of dealing with the ego and turfs and power and control is to make people understand that you're not taking anything away from them, right? And you can do that. And sometimes it's just a function of you have to prove it over time, and people will believe it when they see it. Partners come in with different cultures, and you don't have to have an agency completely change their culture, but they need to at least buy into and be part of the culture of the Family Justice Center. And then we're always building and flying the plane at the same time. And the interesting thing is, we never stop doing that. I thought for a few years, I kept thinking, I can't wait till we get this figured out, and then we're just on autopilot. And then, I don't know, it's probably about year 4 when I finally figured out, oh, that's never going to happen. But the fact that that never happens is also what makes one of the things that makes the work challenging and exciting, and every day is an opportunity to experience something new and different, and go in a new direction and go a little bit further. And that shared sustained funding for all partners, it doesn't just happen magically. It takes work, and it takes real commitment, like Kristie just described. And then, of course, this is true everywhere, but I think it's even more pronounced in rural communities. There's a real challenge around maintaining adequate staffing levels. And not just for you, but for your partner. Well, I want to talk just for a minute about the work of the Alliance and how we provide technical assistance to communities that are developing family justice centers. So just a real quick explainer, our technical assistance to existing family justice centers that work is funded by OVW, that technical assistance. The technical assistance that we do for communities in leading the process of developing new family justice centers is funded through contracts with those communities. So it's essentially a fee for service. But we start out with usually a virtual informational meeting where we might do, depending on what sort of the level of understanding and awareness is, we may do a presentation that looks something like this one today. But generally there are a number of these virtual meetings where we are moving toward a contract and beginning the process of scheduling a study tour. But the first trip we make is a team with a team of 3 people, and we come in and we'll conduct a study tour, which is we'll start with a community forum where we'd love to have 100, 200 people in the room, and we're just laying out the Family Justice Center vision and framework for the community. And then we're conducting a series of focus groups with stakeholders. And we love to tour the courts, shelters, CACs, key institutions in the community. We love to sit and watch court for a little bit. I particularly like to see how the protective order process works. But the most important focus group, as Kristie alluded to earlier, is conducting a focus group of survivors. And so through this process, we will provide an assessment of the readiness of the community to move forward with the process of developing a family justice center. We'll also provide a series of recommendations. Then about 90 to 120 days later, we will come back and conduct 2 days of strategic planning meetings where we will facilitate visioning exercise to lead your community through a process of developing a very specific vision for what you want your family justice center to look like. Physically, what does it look like? What does it feel like to survivors when they walk in the door? What services should be provided there? Who are the partners that are providing those services? What are our shared values and vision? And that's not a vision for what are we going to do in 6 months. That's a vision for 5 years, as Kristie explained earlier. Then we'll work with you to convene work groups and a steering committee that's going to take that strategic plan and really work it to develop the plan that is your community's roadmap for operating a family justice center. I now, in the communities I'm working with, am encouraging starting small, opening an early phase of family justice center within about 6 months of the strategic planning, because I think you shouldn't sit on the strategic plan too long, and you learn so much by doing that I really, and there are people that need you today. So we're really pretty aggressive about timing. And then we will continue to work with you, providing intense technical assistance for another 180 days. After the strategic planning. And that's a lot of meeting virtually with your work groups and your steering committee when there's kind of a stumbling block, helping you get over it, providing examples of different policies and procedures, manuals, just different things that have worked in communities that maybe look like yours. So that's really our process for communities that are in the development process, and it looks the same for big communities and small. Here are a couple of great resources that you can find at our website, familyjustcenter.org. Dream Big is, I consider it to be the Bible for developing a family justice center. I also would encourage you to visit our resource library, where we have all kinds of webinars and toolkits and videos and articles and sample documents and sample reports that we've done for others that will be helpful to you. We have all kinds of great toolkits, including toolkits around poly-victimization, the intersection of substance use and domestic violence, creating voices, groups of survivors. And I'll get in real trouble if I don't tell you, you should join us in San Diego. This is the largest convening family justice center and multi-agency collaborative professionals in the world. And it will be April 23rd through the 25th in San Diego. It is a heck of a lot of fun, in addition to being just a fantastic conference. So you can find more about that at allianceforhope.com. You can join our mailing list by texting Hope Giver to 22828. And finally, thank you. And Lacey, I can't believe it. We're in just under the wire.
So much information, and still a couple of questions. And so we will, for those of you that need to hop off right at 3, go ahead. You will get a, as soon as you log out of Zoom, you will get a survey that, if you'll take that, it'll give you a link to your certificate. But if you guys have just a couple of minutes, there are a couple of questions. So someone asked, my organization serves 12 counties, and all of which are rural. Some of those counties are also being supported by other DV organizations. How can we get together to help one another? It's hard to get out of our county. So I don't know who wants to take that, but Kristie, I don't know if you have any thoughts on that, or Ken.
I'll go ahead, Kristie.
Okay, I was just going to say, my go-to is always find somebody that a lot of people trust or like, or find a place where a lot of people, enjoy meeting or going, and just try to schedule some time to get together. And it doesn't have to be about anything serious at first, but just really trying to be amongst each other really is the first part that I feel is very valuable. And, you know, just trying to find something in common to touch base about, and then you can keep recurring after that.
And if you're in a dispersed area, you know, perhaps starting with a kind of a quarterly virtual gathering might be helpful. And start with a topic that everybody's going to want to talk about too. You know, is think about, just let them know what you're going to be talking about, and think about what's most likely to get them there.
Great, thank you. And then we did have one about where some of the International Family Justice Centers are located. If I'm not mistaken, Ken, I believe that's on the Alliance's website. They can probably access that information on the website. Is that correct?
Yeah, so it's primarily in Europe. There's a whole network of family justice centers. There's at least one in Scandinavia. There's at least one in the Middle East in Jordan. There's a network in Mexico, and then there are a couple in Canada.
Great. Really becoming a global model. And then finally, someone had asked about any family justice centers nationally and abroad that have had to close, and what lessons the Alliance has learned from those.
I'm glad that question got asked. Before I answer that, so I don't miss the opportunity, I just want to say thank you to Kristie for joining us, because it's my job to do this. It is not Kristie's. So she is absolutely giving of her time, and provided all the value that there was in this webinar was provided by Kristie. So thank you for being willing to join us.
Appreciate the chance.
So of the family justice centers that have failed, and there have been some, right? Most of them have failed for lack of leadership. Far more family justice centers have failed because of bad leadership than because of lack of funding. And so what happens sometimes is that you have the first generation of leaders that were they were the inspiration. They were the ones that had the inspiration, right? And Casey likes to say, that one person with a vision is a hallucination. When others share it, that's when it becomes a vision. So it's when that first person that had the hallucination that became a vision when others shared it. When they move on, retire, take another job, whatever it is, often or too often, that second generation of leadership, just for whatever reason, has not always been healthy. And so I think the lesson there is from the very beginning, think about a model that fosters sustained leadership. So I think one of the biggest problems has been that so many family justice centers are led by a governmental agency where there tends to be a lot of turnover in leadership. So think of a police department where it's often a lieutenant that's leading. And so every 2 or 3 years, that's turning over. Or you have a family justice center that's led by the mayor's office, and every time there's a new mayor, there's a different direction. So, you need to think about, as you're building your family justice centers and developing your model of governance and leadership, you're thinking about not only how do we pick the right leaders, but how do we have sustained leadership over time?
Great, thank you. We did have one question when you were sharing some of the stats earlier that I know you know so well off the top of your head, with children exposed to domestic violence being a passion of yours. But hopefully you can maybe, when you send because this is being recorded, it will be available on our website, instituteccr.org, along with a copy of the handout today. So maybe you could share some stats with us, Ken, if that's okay, and we'll post those as well. I'd appreciate that. So
sure.
Thank you so much. And I would be remiss. Thank you both for sharing your expertise with us today. Really, really appreciate it. I'm a huge fan of the Family Justice Center model. I actually used to work at One Safe Place with Ken, had that opportunity. It was a wonderful experience, and I'm a huge fan of this model. So thank y'all both for being here again today. Really appreciate that. I would be remiss and get in trouble if I did not also share that we have our conference on crimes against women coming up in May. Our keynote speakers are going to be from A Call to Men, really highlighting a challenge for men and how they can join the movement. Registration is open, and you can access it there at that QR code. And then I will share my contact information. Thank you so much. Be looking at our website for next month's webinar and that topic for April. We're going to, as I mentioned a minute ago, at the end of the webinar today, a survey will populate in your browser and take a few minutes to complete that in order to get your certificates. And then be looking for the recording within the next few days on our website. So thank y'all everyone for being here, and I hope you have a great day.
Thank you, Lacey.
Thank you.